Welcome to Art Traffic. Let's get going. We had the pleasure of spending our Memorial Day morning with artist Sergio Teran at his home in Montebello, the Beverly Hills of East LA, or so we're told. Sergio took us through his familiar garage studio and talked with us about teaching, painting, lucha, New York, fatherhood, and skateboarding in his living room, lined with his friends and his own artwork. We felt a really special kinship with this artist, and we think you will too. This is Art Traffic. We're here with Sergio Teran. Thanks so much for being here and allowing us to come to your place here in Montebello. And
I call it Mocha, California.
really?
Yeah, I'm always anonymous before. But no, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to be here in 2 weeks.
Yeah, so that's a big event for an artist to try to move, because you have so much. You have everything that everyone else has to do with move, and everyone dreads moving. But for an artist, it's probably triple, I would say.
Yeah, because you got. I mean, all the balance that you get out of wherever you work. Like I paint in the kitchen, right, and I'll carve or I'll sculpt or I'll cut in the garage studio. But to make sure that it's going to be working in the new place, it's going to take a little while before I can really feel where it is I'm going to. I mean, we have our set places because we're actually buying a house for the very first time. So we're pretty excited. Thank you.
That is exciting.
But to find the right spot and how it's going to work, it's going to probably take a while.
So, do you feel like sharing with us where you're moving to? Where's the new?
We're moving to Whittier.
Oh, okay.
Which cool. I got the burbs. We have been kind of
so close. Like it's so close.
It really
is.
Is. Like, I mean, this place is. I always think of Montebello as I always tell people it's like it's like the Bermuda Triangle of East LA. It's like before you know it, you're like, where's Montebello? It's we just passed it, right? Or you're like, hey, we're in the same spot again. It's like,
but so many people are from Montebello.
Well,
it's unreal. Like, but a lot of people are from Montebello and call it East LA. I've found.
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, because you could go across the street and you're in East LA, or you're in LA. It's considered Los Angeles. So right across Whittier is Los Angeles. Like okay, but some people growing up, I'd say, oh, you're in the what do they call it? The Beverly Hills of East LA. I was like, shut up. It's the Beverly Hills of East LA. There's such a thing.
There's no Beverly Hills. But
I still meet some old timers who are like, oh yeah, you live in the Beverly Hills of East LA, right? Because I was like, oh, that's funny.
So you grew up in LA?
Yeah.
Whereabouts?
East LA and Montebello. So I was born at USC Medical Center, pretty much. And most of my teenage years skating was in Montebello. We were in Commerce. We were in Whittier. We were all around because we could do that in the 80s.
Where'd you go to school?
I went to high school in Montebello High School. So it's like a local boy.
Yeah, rip us with the whole education.
Oh, yeah. So I started off in community college. I went to East LA to ELAC, and then I went to the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena. And then I graduated there in 99 and then moved to New York City almost immediately in 2000. And we were there for about 7 years. I went to NYU for graduate school and then finished up in 2002. And then we moved around quite a bit. I lived in Long Island for a year. I was 2 blocks away from the Trade Center before it went down.
Ooh.
Yeah, I used to in the morning I'd jog past it. And then that summer, I sublet a place in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, which is when I first started living in Brooklyn.
Yeah, before Brooklyn was hot, huh?
It was starting to come up.
Starting
to come up, and I mean, gentrification's been happening there for years before I got there. But Williamsburg was pretty nice. There's a couple galleries that are still up and running, like Pierogi was off of. It's the first stop off the L train out of Manhattan, stuff like that. But so I was in Williamsburg and then Bushwick, Brooklyn, which now from what I hear is trendy. And I was like, when I lived there, it was a hole, man. It was pretty scary. And we in 2005 2005, I think, or 2004, we moved. A friend of ours, a close friend of ours from undergrad, she invited us. We had just had Emilio, and she invited us to stay with her. And they have old Vanderbilt property they lived on, and they're like, "Why don't you come over and save, some money and have Emilio be around here?"
Wow.
And exactly.
That's dope.
So shout out to Maxine.
Yeah.
And all of her help.
Yeah,
But that was
amazing.
really, 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 great.
Yeah.
I take the train I used to work, and I know we're going to talk about this later because I've been listening to the
Yeah.
podcast.
Oh, okay,
the Hustle.
cool. Yeah.
But I used to work at probably the art supply store in Manhattan. And I'd take the train in about an hour and a half.
Oh my
from Long
God.
Island.
No. Okay, so my daughter went out to school in Brooklyn. I went out there, and she's like, "I gotta take you to this art store that's in Manhattan. It's like the one. We didn't end up getting there, but it's legend."
Mm-hmm.
What's the name of it?
It's called New York Central, and it was 3 generations owned. So the owner, who's passed away since, Steve Steinberg, he was, he was a kid when he used to come, and he's like, and he would tell the story. He was the shrewd businessman type who'd come out, and customer would come out, and he'd stand up. And he's like, "Oh yeah, I used to deliver, paints to de Kooning, and used to ride my bike to deliver, and yeah, I mean, it was that type of story, Klaus Oldenburg would walk past, and it's celebrities, like random celebrities. I didn't know at the time. This is one of them was Robert Crumb was in the store, and there's 3 levels, but the guys who were in the basement were some comic guys, and they're like, "Robert Crumb's in the in the store," and they just kind of went wild. I was like, oh, it's like I wasn't aware of exactly who he was, but yeah, it's that kind of a place. But that I mean, there's several stores. There's Pearl. There's still Utrecht, I think, but New York Central was there the longest, and has the most history and accounts for sure. So
Yeah, and it's funky.
yeah,
And artists deep down, they like funky.
yeah, pretty much. And a bunch of artists work there, and it's a funny place because you could have a good experience or you could have a really bad experience. So
Yeah.
it was interesting.
So so then you ended up coming back to Los Angeles,
Yeah.
to your roots, and like what predicated all of that after being, a pretty long time, kind of like setting down roots in
Yeah.
New York, and having like a lot of connections and grad school, and
Right.
all that stuff, like.
Yeah, it was tough. Well, number one was having our son see a little more green.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. I got a little sick at the end, and it was just kind of like, we gotta come back. And yeah, I think it was a combination of things, but it was a good idea to have him around family, because that was the one thing, is we're both sort of West Coast raised.
Yeah.
My wife's actually raised in Manhattan. She was born in Manhattan, but raised in Los Angeles, and Emilio was born in Brooklyn. But we all our family's here, so it was sort of like the right choice to bring him up.
Yeah.
For me, New York City's a city for a young person. It's like, and when I say young, I mean kids. It's a lot tougher
20s,
when you're,
right?
yeah. When you're, so if, like, when we moved there, it was like, yeah, I don't have to eat, like today, or like I'll
Like
sleep.
skinny chic.
Yeah, I was like, I slept on the floor for a long time, and it was okay. It's not a big deal. You sort of do it, live check to check, that sort of stuff. So
Yeah.
it's that kind of place, and it was a lot. It became an issue when we're like, well, we want to give them a better surrounding, a better environment.
Yeah,
and
you start caring about things like education for your kid. And,
you're no longer the center of attention.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, maybe we should, Abuela wants to see him, and Abuela wants to help, and that sort of stuff, and that's not a bad thing. So
Yeah.
I think that was really the major thing. And we were still connected to Los Angeles. We'd come back every summer. And I started to teach out of grad school as a substitute for a painting instructor there at NYU, and then in the summers I'd come back, and a mentor of mine was like, "Come see me," and he started me out, teaching as well. So like we'd come make some cash, and I could bring it back, sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And so, how did the work evolve through this time period? Because your work to me seems, it's not just highly personal, it's highly, it's somewhat political, but also the development of surface, of palette, of nearly of your drawing style, of nearly every aspect of your work.
Mm-hmm.
You can see just by looking at it that time is a huge element in it. It's not just in its development over what you can tell is just decades,
Mm-hmm.
but also is like the actual time it takes to produce a piece. It seems as if each individual painting, print, drawing is on its own timeline as well.
Mm-hmm.
So what can you tell us about how the work progressed through that early time period? Let's say like maybe just like what I would consider to be like the proto art of maybe like high school through Art Center NYU, and then to the return to Los Angeles.
After high school, I think community college was sort of the introduction to something a little more sophisticated in medium and direction for like voice through canvas or painting or whatever it might have been, sculpture. So that was pretty much kind of like absorbing everything, just trying to like look at a lot of work that I was influenced by, trying to practice the painting and understanding that it wasn't an accident that I worked at art supply stores pretty much throughout college, and it wasn't an accident. I wanted to know what to use and how to use it, and of course, like as you'd mentioned, there was art supply stores, they attract other artists, other students who have an interest in medium from different disciplines. So that wasn't an accident, but through that experimentation and learning early on, I was really interested in Parisian painters, but it was influenced by content as well, and content's always been a part of my work. The surface and understanding how to do paint, how to deal with paint is there, but content was important. And I come from an alcoholic family. Like we have a lot of the men in our family. I'm not me, fortunately not me, but a lot of the men in.
It's okay, we don't discriminate against alcoholics here at Art Traffic.
We're alcoholics, so these Parisian painters were really like, wow, like this is interesting, I dig like these absinthe painters, right? So there's a lot of that going on, and there's a little book that I'd gotten. It's called History in a Bottle, I think, something to that effect. Where it had like these painters who were sort of it was sort of like set around that wormwood drink, and I started to look at those guys. Started to look at the compositions. They're influenced by photography. Those guys. There's a lot of tabletops. They were contemplative and they were drunk, and so that became a series of works that I started with, and in the mid 95 to 98, I would say. And I started to a lot of ochres, a lot of browns, really really muted. I was looking at Degas, and I was looking at Winslow Homer was painting on black. A lot of European painters. Though in high school, just to sort of back up a little bit, I did grow up. All the murals in Los Angeles you can't ignore. Those were a huge effect. Unconsciously, and then back and forth we'd go visit family in Mexico when I was a lot younger more often, and there's the murals by Orozco over there, and I noticed as a younger teen, like the relationship was like, wow, these really sort of feel that way. If you go down Brooklyn Avenue at the time, it's now Cesar Chavez, and you see all those murals by the LA streetscapers. Those were a huge influence, you know. I remember being a kid going to the doctor with my mom on the bus and seeing some of those murals, you know. There's a big mural in the Payless shoe store, you know what I'm talking about?
I don't have it in my mind right now,
there's
but I
like
think it's going to come to me any second.
I have
right
a
now.
book, but if there's anybody,
you don't remember the artist.
Oh yeah, I want to say it was the LA Streetscapers, so that would be Wayne Healy, the Boteo brothers.
Okay.
Yeah, so a lot of Wayne Healy murals are, you know, with these colors, very specific colors to the murals, easy to identify. I think were influential. And then there was another huge mural at East LA College Library, up the walkway, which was LA Streetscapers as well. So these things are kind of, I mean, very influential, very sort of first introduction to what would feel, it's not so much Catholic religion and these icons on prayer cards. It's this sort of like next level thing, and so there's a relationship. It's like I kind of got it, but in undergrad, I started to look at painters from Europe in that time, and the content mattered, and it started to really refine itself towards the end of the 90s, because I had instructors who were influential to what I was doing. In undergrad, the fine art department didn't do any painting at Art Center. They didn't really want to.
Yeah, it was deeply unpopular in the 90s to be a painter.
And not to name any instructors, they were pretty down on it. Anyway, but there's illustrators who sort of like they came into the fine art, genre and really started to just do that. These instructors were in the illustration department, but they were kind of teaching people, and they're also an example because they were showing in fine art galleries, which were Peter Zukoski was one of the instructors, F. Scott Hess, another amazing fine art painter, a figurative painter, very, very Northern Renaissance style work in the LA context. That's kind of encapsulating them, but those guys were, and then there was Aaron Smith, who's still at Art Center College of Design. Who these guys were kind of like going like, no, you guys can paint, and we'll talk about it, and we'll talk about these painters, and we'll talk about how to approach it and composition and all that other stuff. So fortunately that they existed. So it was interesting. Like they were like, it was like a physical thing that you can still make and show in a gallery, and these guys were kind of like championing the people who still wanted to do that, and I was lucky to have those guys. But so my painting started to really refine itself, and I think it had to do with some of those instructors who painted that way. But once I graduated, it went back. It's sort of like I started to apply things a lot thicker. I added calcium carbonate to the paint to make it thicker. Started to look at Lucian Freud, who I really, sort of loved, or just these Parisian painters who were kind of post-impressionist painters. So it's a little thicker, it's not as refined, and it just had the visceral quality of the paint, had so much more presence, and I really wanted that out of the work.
And so in your work now, that the fact that you process-wise, in some of the works, when you begin a work, it may start as one thing, and then other elements can get collaged onto it.
Yeah.
There's no real, in some of the pieces, not in everything, but in some of the pieces, it may start somewhere. It may take turns. You seem really willing to go along with whatever
I'll destroy
turns
it if I have to.
That might come, and then worry about like it doesn't, like dimension doesn't seem to be a concern of yours. It seems to be like you're on an investigation. Yeah. And then that's how it's like you it seems like you have a point of interest that begins an investigation, and then where it goes is kind of open. You're sort of like Robert Mueller a little bit. You have a probe, and then where it goes.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope.
Like, I think you might take down Trump. Just like you may begin a painting and you may take down Trump.
I can understand the intensity of wanting to, but
yeah. But is this a sculptural impulse?
Absolutely. I hadn't layered like nowadays you'll see I'll bandsaw a figure out and then mount it on another. I'll mount it on canvas, or if I need to. I do sculpture now. Things are a lot more dimensional. I'll do an actual sculpture piece, but yeah, for sure.
One of the things that you talked about earlier was that you say no to projects, and you were saying that someone might come to you and say like, I want to work on something for this and this deadline, and can you create me a piece? What do you have to say about the power to say, or how you decide what to say yes to, what to say no to?
Yeah, I think that giving the work time, this is my approach, is typically, and it doesn't necessarily mean time to actually finish a painting. It means to sit and think about it, and and respond to it, because I want that, and I want that space, and I'll work on several pieces at once. It could be 13 pieces at once. So if somebody asks for like a theme show and can you make a piece, it's like, I'm not interested in doing that. The work that I'm going to show in the present time is finished already, and it's ready to go. And anything that I'm working on now will be shown in the future. I don't like rushing things and forcing the work.
That takes a certain amount of courage. I'm not saying that you're going into the line of fire in battle or anything like that, but I'm saying it does, to make that decision as an artist, because you're thinking, wow, I could really get exposure. I need a show. There's this other kind of pressure to be like, if I want to have a larger audience, I need these platforms. But then to be able to push all those thoughts out and say like, this is what the work needs.
I don't find that I need to. I mean, depending on the show, don't get me wrong. I there's some shows out there that are great, and I really want to be a part of. Or there's even been shows where like, fuck, I wish I was in that. I still fit in that, right? Like that, right. But it's I wouldn't feel like I'm putting forth my best work if I'm making something for it. I think a part of, and I've again been listening to your podcast and some of the previous, but the whole like idea of the hustle is a part of the lifestyle. Yeah. That I know you'll get to this, but selling paintings to me is a hustle, and sure. And sometimes I'll do that, but I don't have to do it. I don't have to do it. I don't have that sort of pressure. I've worked with it in New York City. I had gotten a gallery right after graduating. I'd gotten with a gallery in Boston, they were great. They've been around for 30 years. They sold paintings like pancakes. It was really great because we'd get this check and be like, yeah, we're gonna have food this week. Or we're gonna have meat. Yeah. But they were the great thing about that place was that they're like, we like it all. Like it's like. Whatever.
They weren't curating a theme of we are modernism, and
they weren't trying to say, can you make more of these? Like, that never happened.
So you have this theme going through of just kind of like defiance, I would have to say, of like the way you like even approach the work, but how you approach almost everything. There's political aspects of the work that depict defiance. How does that manifest itself, and is it conscious, or is this just like, this is a part of my DNA, it just comes out no matter what I do?
I feel maybe I feel that way. Well, back to the discussion we were having earlier where I was like, when I'm in Mexico, I'm not Mexican.
Yeah.
Right. And when we're in Los Angeles, we got this, orange, monster going, perpetuating immigrants and your connection to it. And I grew up that way too in Los Angeles, just like, I remember when I saw Edward James Olmos in Zoot Suit on cable in 1981 or 82 because there were reruns, and going like, yeah. And then I soon saw him again to sort of like to reinstate that sort of empowerment of seeing myself on screen in Blade Runner.
Oh yeah.
And he looked good in Blade Runner. He was he was like cleaned up. Right?
Plus he was like so tough.
Yeah.
And he had that like obstinate, like the unmoved mover in that role.
Absolutely.
So he's a god figure.
Yeah, absolutely. And but to see, where movies were so prevalent, there was a theater here we used to go and see everything at, it was just so part of the landscape here. We go catch movies, and I saw, my uncle took me to everything that he shouldn't have.
Is that where the fights were too, at the movie theater?
The fights?
Yeah, that's where I grew up. The fights were at the movie theater.
Oh yeah.
Too. After the movie got out and the two people saw each other, like they had beef because everyone was at the movie. And then there's also fights in your paintings too. That's why I mentioned
that's
it.
That's right.
Because
well, that's just family, or my dad was really he was a problem type of person, right? He
mine too. That's weird.
Yeah, I saw my dad get beat up. Well, so this is an incident that happened was there. I had come out of the house, and there's this guy who apparently was a drug dealer or some connected to drugs, and he said, "Is your father home?" And I said, "He's not home," because I didn't know he was home, and I had my skateboard with me, and I was going to get out, and he walks out right when I say that, and so this guy just gives me a dirty look, right? And I was like, well, whatever. So I go and I skate through the alleyway, which is towards a Johnson's Market, where I would kind of like session the parking lot.
Yeah.
And so I was there for several hours, and then I was starting to come home, and this car, I was like, it's a long 80s car, just kind of like starts, accelerating towards me, and I had to get out of the way quick, and it was this guy, the same dude that I was like, right, and I hear him screech through the corner. And I was like, oh, holy cow, it's that guy. So I skate over there, and as I get there, there's these guys who are just finishing beating up my father in the alleyway. They're kicking his ass. And my dad gets up, and he gets a big old brick, and they get in the car, and he just throws it through the back of the window of that car. Right? So I mean, these are things that...
Yeah, that's just like a gnarly emotional...
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's pretty intense. There's a lot of stories we have like that. My dad carried a gun. My dad, and just stuff like So it was a part of the landscape. There was certainly fights that you saw, but I think it's a lot more traumatic when it's the family, or it's even there's the piece that's family fight. We saw that we come from a wrestling family. My uncle, my father's oldest brother, was Jack the Ripper, Jack el Destripador.
Whoa!
Right, and he was the LA circuit. On my mother's side, is my uncle, my tío Rodolfo, was Blue Scorpio, and he was in Mexico in Guadalajara. But my dad and the oldest brother, my uncle, they didn't get along, and for a long period they didn't talk. But we saw them fight. And I talked to my cousin, who's Benny's, it was his dad. And with that last time we saw each other, because we didn't see each other for a long time after, we had gone swimming, and they got into beef. And my uncle threw himself off of the stairs and landed on my dad and just started pounding on him. And I don't know if he broke his collarbone, my dad, at that moment. And we were just like wailing, right? We were like freaking out.
Yeah. Course,
but that sort of stuff is what influences that existence. But and that family fight one, it is. I'm kind of thinking of myself as well as this sort of like separated in these different stages. So like myself as the young adult, myself as the older, like influenced by my father, and then just sort of the environment, that exists around me. So it's an interesting kind of like, I let those sort of like overlap each other, but it has the wrestlers come from obviously that, but the fights and that sort of those traumatic experiences just being sort of like they're kind of normal to us.
The whole entirety of Los Angeles is almost a set in a way, like a film or a television set, in the way that we build it up and we knock it down every 10 years, and there's no real reverence to architecture or place, but yet there is to the people who grew up here, who live here, who have lived generations here. So there's these two separate Los Angeleses. There's the authentic one that we're talking about, which is like the authenticity that just comes from time. You know, that we just live here, and the fact that you know, there's also like the authenticity of time that in the skateboarding culture. You mentioned skateboarding a couple of times already, and there's that authenticity that comes from shared experience. You can go to any skateboarder from Los Angeles, and no matter what, and it just transcends all of race and religion and ethnicity. All of it. It just is just like, oh, now we have this common language,
Right.
And there's several threads like that through Los Angeles. That's a lot about what we try to talk about here, is that even though it is a set and it's this place that gets knocked down and built up, that's a part of all of our reality and all of our commonality. And that's one of the big reasons why I was like so excited when Elmer, who, thanks to Elmer Guevara, who made us aware of your work and stuff, because I wasn't aware until he recommended you to us. And then when I saw your work, I was just like, oh yeah, this is cool. This is gonna, yes, this is what I'm talking about, you know. And then that kind of like defiance that I see in your work is also part of that skateboarding aesthetic, which is like, I wouldn't be surprised if that doesn't come out in all kinds of ways. Which brings us to, like, I feel like our kind of like our back two portions of our interview process, which is like side hustles, and then your challenge for us of who you would like to hear us talk to next. But like almost side hustles could almost like start with skateboarding. It's kind of like, even though that's not a money generating thing, it's such like a big influence in the way that you are like, there's that kind of like a DIY element to what you do. There's like, it's not possible in your work to go and get a fabricator to go make you a dozen paintings. Right. You know, like, so you have that DIY element that to me is also integral in skateboarding. It's integral in like a lot of just the art historical culture that you've referenced to us just in this interview. Like your hand has to be involved. So talk about that a tiny bit with how it pertains to you, your work, but then also like, does that early skateboarding stuff, like,
big time,
that influences?
Oh, big time. I mean, for me, skateboarding is sort of like the first introduction to being an artist. Like, you know, the individualism.
It's the sport that's not a sport, right?
That's yeah.
It's the sport
it
that's
is
an
not
art.
a sport. It's sorry. It is not a sport.
It is not a sport.
You know. Yeah. So it's the individualism. It's the very first time that, you know. Again, you know, like being brought up in Montebello, which is apparently the Beverly Hills of Montebello, and my mom was always, don't do this, don't be that, right? And with skateboarding, I can just sort of like go, I'm gonna go do this.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessary to like I could say I'm skateboarding and I'd be in Whittier, right, or I'd be in Commerce. But you know, the culture, you know, and seeing it through magazines at the time, seeing these people be individuals, you know. The graphics were so very influential, right?
Yeah.
Graphics.
Who hasn't had that deck that you can't skate it because it's too beautiful?
That's right. Or like, you know, like for, you know, being somebody who didn't grow up around pools, the rails were to preserve my, you know, not as graphics. I was like, hey, Rails are gonna fuck up my graphics. Like, I want to keep this board for about a month. But yeah, I think for me it's skateboarding presents the artist, being creative on a skateboard, taking on a challenge, fulfilling that challenge, and then feeling, gratified through it, and coming with it brand new, starting something completely new. I can do something different now. I can, taking on, understanding the environment, and then sort of turning that environment into some sort of a challenge as well.
Or understanding it in a whole new way.
Yeah,
like it's a whole new way to look at
or
topography,
and the exploration aspect of it too. The fact that I could go explore, was huge.
So transitioning to, from skateboarding, like, what was your first job? What was the first thing that you did out here to make money?
My first job, what did I do? I did do for a couple bucks. I do graphics on people's grip tape as a kid. So, but I as a kid, as a teen, I worked retail. Which sucked. Which sucked too, because when you're in college, you want to just be a college student. Yeah. If you have that, if you could just like concentrate on studying or working and doing projects, it's always the best thing. But if you need the extra cash, it's kind of tough. But I wish I worked at a record shop or something, I could tell you. But I did, and I worked like at the Gap as a teen. Which
heck yeah. Would it make you feel better if I mentioned some horrible things that I did?
Sure.
All right. I worked at a carnival. All right, Carney. I am literally that guy that would like put a ride together with duct tape and then tell you it's okay to put your kid on it.
Right.
Sure. Yeah, no, we don't need bolts. It'll be fine.
I remember now is I did valet parking in Encino.
Classic.
And that was shit because it was at an Islands restaurant. And it sucked because they are very entitled, and you're wearing a Hawaiian shirt and little shorts.
Yeah.
And it's like, here,
because
your son's cringing for me.
Yeah, this kid's worked in some restaurants. Don't worry about it. You're amongst friends.
But that was something to remember is that in Encino, But progressing, I was an artist assistant. I have been able to do some like illustration jobs out of undergrad. That always helped. Some of the worst jobs. My dad had a catering truck when we were kids, so they're cooks. The Teran family, they're cooks. My father had a catering truck. And we worked on the truck. So we'd get on Sunday we'd get some cash, but my brother took the brunt of that. He'd get up pretty early at 5 a.m. to load all the stuff. But we washed the truck. We helped them. There was a place down in it might have been Commerce Industrial area where we'd load up and we'd get the ice and load up the trucks, and then any sort of like packaged foods or drinks. They had sort of a system where he'd check off and he'd pay a fee at the end. We'd load that stuff up. Yeah. So we did that with my dad. It was an orange catering truck, and I kid you not, he had the cucaracha on the horn.
Oh yeah.
Da, 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 da.
Yeah, that's not. You don't see that anymore.
You don't, but
you used to be able to see that in like a nice like car too, like somebody who's like really like a tricked out car.
That's right. That's nice. Yeah. That's the 80s.
So how do you make it work now? Do you make 100% of your income off of artwork now?
No, absolutely not. I don't know. I don't remember a time where that happened. Yeah. I've always I was able to teach after grad school pretty soon after, and that became a source of funding. And but it's always been for me. It's the hustle still exists. To be an artist, to be able to do work and have the freedom and feel like you have the freedom to make whatever you want. is where it's at.
That's what we're trying to do. The important thing for you, isn't it? Like, you have to have that, or else the work just dies on the vine, right?
Absolutely. Or at least it gets thrown into the art compost, right? And I'll be like, oh, where's that thing? And I'll yank it out, and I'll, do something with it, or chip off a piece and go, oh, I can use this.
Things aren't necessarily precious in your work, are they?
No, you have to be willing to take a chance and destroy it in order to get it someplace. If you're not willing to do that, it's conventional, and that's not where I work.
Yeah.
For me, it's got to be, I'll take a sander to it. I'll scraping. It's not an uncommon part of the process. Nowadays, the painting aspect of it, I can do pretty quickly. I can really, that piece there was done in a week. But they're spray painted. I'm constantly carrying it back and forth, doing things to it in order to get there, and that's the process. Spray painting it, scraping it down, and eventually it'll get there. There's a part of the paintings where I'm like, yep, that's where I want it to be, right? And I'm not exactly sure how to describe it, but I can definitely feel it. And it comes through, having to scrape, sand, paint, varnish, all those sort of different aspects before I can actually get to it. But yeah, if I'm not taking a chance with it, I don't know where it's going to go.
We're actually kind of like finishing up side hustles in a weird way, because I mean, it actually it is all part and parcel. And to be, I worked as a fabricator for a long time, and I've never met an artist who didn't have a side hustle, and I've never met anyone who wasn't part of the art world. Like, so people not artists or associated with artists, I've never met someone who was aware of the hustle. Like, so that's why we had to make it a permanent part of this show. Like, or we just needed people in the general public to understand, in a more deep way, when you go to a museum and you see this work, the museum and the gallery have this effect on people, or the audience, of isolating the work by itself, and they don't understand the context, and they don't understand what an artist's life is really like, or what it takes for us to make this work and to bring it to you, and how important it is for us to reach out to you and communicate to you, the audience. And that's it's a beautiful gift that artists give to people, and not to be too heavy-handed with it or too belabored. It's also an impulse that we have to do, so it's not 100% generous, but there is a generosity to it.
There, I couldn't imagine not doing it, and now I most of my income comes from teaching. So I'm a professor of art, and that's never been, for me, it's always been like, I'm lucky. This is great.
Yeah.
Because early on, I got somebody to bring me into the system, because it's kind of hard to do.
Yeah.
If you're not in the system, you have to somehow gradually do it, and to get tenure is tough to do.
I thought it was like a unicorn.
Yeah, that's right. It really
now it's a unicorn.
It really can be for some people, and I know there's this mythology that if you're doing it, you're not, which is dumb. Which is, to me, it's just listen, I don't come from that privileged background where I could not have to work, and I'm proud to do it. Whenever I was doing, I was happy to do it so that I can come back, and it didn't mean anything, and it still doesn't mean anything. The people that I'm working with, the young artists, the young potential artists, are part of the whole system. They're gonna, 10 years down the line, be in my place, whether it be in front of the easel or teaching, it's all connected. It's really, really interesting. And from and people that I admire as successful artists were always teaching to some capacity. I mean, if you think, I mean, Kiki Smith taught a class at NYU, and I forget where else. Larry Pittman's at UCLA. I mean, you think about these people. It's like the teaching is one of those things that are available to do that, which is great. And some people, it's different. Some people will do that, but through in college, when I was a student, I was introduced to artists who I would never have gotten a chance to have met. Leo Akanchi, the video artist.
Yeah.
We just passed
Vito,
away.
right?
Vito
Akanchi.
Vito Akanchi. Also here, it's sort of, the academic part of it is interesting, but it allows an extension of what we're doing, because I'm able to talk about it with younger, the approach to how you would sort of be analytical about your work. They see me doing this, right? Having shows, they come to the shows, or they see me, they see the work somewhere where it's like, oh, that's my professor. And I'm also like, Chicano from Los Angeles.
Yeah.
To some of them, I've had a student go, like sort of the James Olmos thing, like, oh, like it's like, I want to go to school because like you're Mexican and you're teaching, and I wouldn't otherwise have seen it. I was like, well, you probably would. You just have to go to another college, but it's nice to know that might even be an aspect of it. So I think it's important to be in that role, at least for me, for the face of the community that I came from. The Dana Duff interview. I really,
she's amazing.
God, I love the idea of, she talked about questioning her students of what success is and failure is, and to understand that. And I think that's super important.
Yeah,
because that's really gonna guide, where you want to be and your expectations of it, because it's a mythology. It's like, well, I want to be an artist. It's a mythology.
Yeah.
Where do you place it?
Yeah.
In society, especially when you have parents who are like working class parents who are like,
yeah, and we're constantly defining it.
Yeah.
And it exists inside of a market, inside of a capitalist system. Yeah. Which I know that's a loaded word, but it is a true part of our market driven everything. We have to make this money in order to try to live, and like you were saying, you are constantly kind of building your legitimacy. Who will consider you to be an artist? Who can claim it? Right. Whereas anyone can claim it, but we've also found that you have to explain yourself less if you have this accomplishment or that credential. That's right. Or that,
That's right. And you can get, as a young artist, you can get caught up in that, like, authenticity in order to be, and that can be noise for what you're trying to do. Yes. Just get out and do it. And like the flatline, people,
love them.
Like, just get out and do it. It's the time to do it. Like,
so lastly, but not leastly, sort of the people that we interview on this show, and the whole concept of this is like, we wanted to pull the threads of the art world, right? So we began by saying, like, we're gonna interview our friends, and we kind of started with my sister, who's an artist, and then friends of mine, Mario Ibarra, Juan Capistran, and we just started pull the threads of the art world and see where it leads us. And it's very much that idea of like exploration and treasure hunting that we were talking about that kind of led us to you. And so that's been a really fun aspect of this podcast. And so who is it that you would like to hear from, and where would you like to send us on our treasure hunt?
And now, does it have to be one person?
It doesn't. You could. It's free form. It's like skateboarding. Yeah. All right. Yeah. You can make it up. we're not building a skate park and you don't have to do this over here. You make it your
That's
own,
right.
okay?
It's always going to be a rail. I think that, there's people who I know and sort of would say, wow, these are interesting people. And I want to mention, number one person who's an artist in Los Angeles for a while now. His name's Luis Serrano. And he does drawing. That's one of Luis's drawings there. He does on-site drawings. He goes out. His studio is pretty much, he goes out on a regular. Like that's what he does.
Yeah.
Luis went to school in the early 80s at Otis College of Design with Peter Zukoski, who was a big mentor of mine, and Kerry James Marshall. So they're all sort of like still connected somehow. But he's really just for me, like a philosopher. He's just like, so anytime I talk to Luis, it's so insightful.
Yeah.
I go home remembering things. He and his wife have lived this lifestyle as artists and educators. And I would say Luis Serrano, if you can get a chance to talk to him, and be great. Another artist who I know and I really like his work is Gerardo Monta Rubio, Ceramist. He went to UCLA. He does ceramic, and they're not conventional in any way. They're sometimes these masses, and then he draws on them, so they could be graffiti, the sort of like reflective things. He does these sort of like narrative based things. They're very for lack of a better description, they're urban sort of tales, if you would, on them.
Yeah.
I think he's from Oaxaca originally. I think you can Google him and see some of the imagery, but that stuff is really cool. I hope to work with Gerardo in the near future. I run a residency program at Cerritos College. I run printmaking. And so I've been inviting artists every year now. This is the second year. Mario Barra is one of them this year. To the artists who don't typically print make, and we'll invite them and to do a work during the month of June. But I hope to work with Gerardo next year. We talked a little bit about that. Alan Nakagawa, I really love Alan's work.
Okay.
Alan's work, sound artist.
Yeah.
He was a resident last year for the printmaking resident. But Alan's he's all over Los Angeles.
So how do you work that? Do you approach people, or do you?
Yes, it's invitational.
They apply. It's
an invitational. Then I'll send them an application.
So what gave you that idea, though? That's a pretty
kind of not too different from what you're doing here. Is like that. I run the printmaking department, and how do we get? Where does it fit in the workplace? Like printmaking, this archaic, a process. People call it a dead art, and where does it fit in the context of our culture? Well, it does.
It's so popular, right? It's having a giant resurgence. Yeah. I've just been noticing.
Yes,
it's not being written about. It's not being put, but it has this giant useful thing to us too. I have theories about this. I'm sure you have better ones than I do because you work in it all the time.
I think that's where it is where it's all really theoretical. But the phrase street art, I think, exists because of printmaking, because these street artists are doing things that are common in the print studio, and then putting it up publicly. Yeah. So printmaking has and street art is huge nowadays.
Yeah.
That's one of the things, but it is introducing my advanced students who have some promise in printmaking to artists from the art world and around Los Angeles, right? And then bringing those guys in to the students work as techs to help them out with the processes, and then they're able to filter out. They'll do something within the studio, and we're there at just basically guiding them as studio hands. So Alan Nakagawa was the other artist that I like to do, but I haven't. I think this artist is really cool, and we went to community college together a while back, but I don't talk to him, so I don't know him that way. But I love the work and just to get you on the podcast, hopefully you do. But Gajin Fujita, I love his work. Gajin.
I'm not aware of his work either.
He does. He's basically like, he's Japanese American from what I understand, and he does there's these, it's like he comes from a graffiti background, and there's these Japanese icons sort of mixed with graffiti context paintings.
Okay.
So you can check that out.
Cool.
And then so I'm just throwing.
No, give it. I can't promise we'll get them all.
No.
But I've been amazed at how generous people are with their time, and it's been an incredible thing.
I think Kim Abelees is a great artist, and I think she's speaking to generosity and generous people to speak to. If you can talk to Kim Abelees,
yeah, for sure.
She's pretty amazing.
Wow. Yeah, that's a good piece of homework. We'll get after it. We have our mission.
I think I gave a spectrum one, so it's like you can be like, oh yeah, well somebody's gonna hit.
That's
Somebody
great.
hit.
Yeah, we're game for it. It was great having Sergio on the show. If you want to follow along with Sergio on Instagram, his handle is Sergio Teran Arts, and his website is sergioteran.com. If you have an artist, curator, gallerist you'd like to hear from on Art Traffic, drop us a line with suggestions at arttrafficpodcast@gmail.com or hit us up in the DMs at arttrafficla@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.